Paul W.S. Anderson has had a great track record for directing absolute garbage fires like the live-action Resident Evil movies or the more recent Monster Hunter film. But among his pile of jokes lies a little-known movie called Event Horizon. Set in the depths of space of the distant future, the well-deserved cult classic story revolves around the crew of a ship called Lewis and Clark that are tasked to board the long-lost but recently reappeared ship called the Event Horizon. As you can imagine, things don't exactly go well, as the story also revolves around the topics of sci-fi and supernatural horror with religious undertones. Not to discredit how well the movie is made, but one of the best things to have come out of it is a little-known masterpiece called Dead Space. If Event Horizon provided references of hell, then Dead Space makes you live through it by faithfully recapturing the more classic sci-fi horror aesthetics with just the right amount of modern thrown into the mix that till this day makes the game infinitely enjoyable to play. And if you think that a hero's death should be dignifying, then you need to take a look at some of these. This poor guy's name is Isaac Clarke, whose journey starts much like any other protagonist, being in the right place at the wrong time, or something like that. And the place is the USG Ishimura, aka the largest planet-cracking ship in its class.
And it looks like they already popped the cork.
The subtle yet blindingly bright opening scene immediately establishes your point of view for the rest of the game, as after a brief moment of enjoying the spectacular view of the well-detailed, creepy, and exponentially enlarging Ishimura, you're forced to crash land on its dock, effectively establishing the fear and the reality of being stranded in an unknown territory. Much like any good horror story, the first couple of minutes are spent establishing the dread and anxiety that comes to a head as the clearly expendable crew is, well, expended, and everyone is introduced to the horrifying existence of the deformed reanimated butchers called the Necromorphs. The first encounter plunges the player further into a state of helplessness, as you are forced to experience the tight and dark hallways of Ishimura for the first time while being chased by these creatures with no means of defending yourself, hoping that the lift doors at the end of the corridor are your saving grace. Shortly after that, you receive your first weapon, an engineering tool fit for your engineering protagonist called the Plasma Cutter. It takes the approximately 10-hour-long journey of Dead Space's campaign under 10 minutes after its first opening credit to establish its tone, the enemies you need to face, the weapons you can expect to have, the tension between the characters, your environment, and all the dread that comes with it. This tight-knit, tension-packed roller coaster ride immediately provides the hook that all compelling narratives need. But the narrative is not the only compelling aspect here. Most of the roster of 7 weapons consists of futuristic industrial cutting tools, because whereas shooting in the head might be the policy applied to the undead for a lot of other stories, Dead Space requires you to shoot off enemy limbs in order to put them down for good. All the weapons have a real kick to them, and the sheer intensity with which the limbs of your enemies are dismembered leave you confused between feelings of satisfaction and disgust. And if you're still not really satisfied, you can watch all this happen in slow motion with a shot of stasis that can aid you in the stickier situations and possibly help you out in solving a puzzle or two. Speaking of which, killing baddies is not the only agenda here. Some of the sections, particularly the zero-gravity ones that, along with providing you with great disorientation, can make use of kinetic tool along with the aforementioned stasis to get through the trickier sections. But even when you're big braining through these sections, you're never really safe with the enemies almost always lurking around. The nightmare fuel that are the Necromorphs are a bunch of displeasingly reshaped reanimated corpses that are the result of an extraterrestrial infection, an infection caused by an ancient artifact called the Marker. This also brings about the aspect of the psychological horror and all the madness with religion into the mix of the story, and plays a significant role in some of the events of the game.
Dr. Cross was a true believer. She had faith. And now she awaits her transformation, her rebirth. Are you ready to ascend, Mr. Temple?
But fear not, if you can. The game gives you plenty of ways to upgrade your arsenal and equipment along the way, from the ability to purchase weapons and health packs to permanently upgrading your weapon damage, capacity, and reload speed. And did I mention the almost Iron Man-like upgrades to your armor? But all this upgrading requires hard work. Not only would you need to find the credits along the way to make your purchases, but you'll also be required to find schematics to add to the store itself. Found a new suit schematic but don't have enough space to carry it to the store? Well, you don't have Resident Evil like equipment Tetris over here, but you'll simply just need to decide whether to drop an item or not. There is a great sense of balance applied to the upgradability that brings about a great sense of achievement for unlocking and attaining a piece of equipment that you've been eyeballing for a short while.
Isaac. Damn, you scared me. The place is making me jumpy.
Having acquired the means to defend yourself, it might be the best idea to walk instead of running, as not only you might feel scared shitless of what lies around any of the claustrophobic corners, but also because this very much living, breathing sci-fi dungeon of a labyrinth might require some navigating. However, this is where the modern to the sci-fi kicks in. Dead Space thrives on the fact that it had its own take on multiple avenues of gameplay and the visual makeup. If Resident Evil 4 introduced the over-the-shoulder camera, then Dead Space pretty much perfected it for the horror genre. If you like Doom's automap implementation, well, Dead Space sort of had it first. If you don't like waypoint markers being displayed on your screen, Dead Space's last-minute inclusion of the Pathfinder mechanic can still hold up in games today. And if you like your horror games to have a no heads-up display policy, then Dead Space makes everything from your health bar to your ammo count and even other interactions a part of the world itself so that it seems equally usable to the character as it is to the player. Everything is built into the world of Dead Space for a sublime and seamless experience. And talking about seamless, Dead Space was one of the first games to try and mask its loading screens on a generation of consoles where it was thought impossible. For anyone, including myself, who praises God of War's 35-hour-long single-take tracking shot, Dead Space all the way back in 2008 was trying its damn best not to skip a beat, with no pre-rendered cutscenes and almost no cuts in the camera when transitioning from gameplay to the very rarely occurring cutscenes, if any. The tech, however, doesn't stop there. Released around the time when PC was getting left in the dust in favor of the 7th gen consoles with some of the most lackluster ports imaginable for big game titles, Dead Space runs like a charm. The fact that this game just works with such an image quality without having to jump through hoops as you might need to for a title this old is impressive in itself. Dead Space is a case study in dedicating resources effectively when it comes to art direction. While something like Crysis might have it all in the bag with all aspects of visuals being dialed up to 11 in 2007, Dead Space's art direction feels like it is what it was always meant to be. A great amount of emphasis on lighting and real-time shadows, with loads of fake, yet to this day convincing looking light shafts, darker areas that fit the theme of the game while also hiding the textures, and great looking enemy design with an even greater emphasis on the animation and dismemberment. There are entire spaces in some levels that are made to feel as if they are covered in shadows, while in fact they might not even exist at all, reducing the cost of object distance detailing. But by combining hauntingly echoing sound effects and literal smoke, these places are made to feel huge. Although there are some actual visible used spaces that you come across as well. There is a great amount of effort put into not just the reduction of the visual cost, but also the provision of a visually distinct experience. The dark and harrowing spaces of the fuel refilling station are a great contrast to the loud and explosive engine room. The openness of the bridge surrounded by gigantic glass walls, providing a clear view into the vastness of space, is a complete shift from the smoky and tight corridors that lead up to it. Every time a door slides open to reveal a new area, you might just pause to take a look before you walk in, taking in the sights and sounds set up for you in that section, quickly noticing the differences. Entering a vacuum immediately tints the screen slightly blue to make you feel the cold emptiness of space, which is further enhanced by the excellent sound design that muffles and mutes all audio except for Isaac's breathing inside his helmet, further increasing the feel of isolation. But in other places, the sound design excels at inducing paranoia. The sights and sounds are one thing, but the aspect of design in terms of how the game plays out is a thing of beauty itself. The environments are not only different on their own, but in fact, every time you revisit a section of the ship, which is something that you do quite often, you're bound to find a change of some sort, whether it's visual or in terms of gameplay. A lot of these changes are made by you by playing the events of the story. Speaking of which, the inspirations of this game is something that it tends to wear proudly, as it should. Isaac is a silent protagonist, much like Half-Life's Gordon Freeman, but in a third-person view. There are almost System Shock levels of twists present here, but smaller and multiple. The aforementioned revisits to sections are a clear indication of Metroidvania, but in a very linearly driven game. But the thing that I found most surprising after playing this game after such a long time is how the story is delivered. This, in my opinion, is the aspect of Dead Space that separates it from its sequels. Dead Space 3 is, well, its own beast entirely, but even when comparing it to Dead Space 2, which I believe is one hell of a sequel, Dead Space 1 feels unique. But the uniqueness once again comes in the form of inspiration from the mentioned titles. The game barely takes control from the player and pretty much completely avoids cramming a bunch of cutscenes down your throat. All the story either happens around the player in real time or via text and audio logs that provide for a depressing yet satisfying context to what you're surviving through. I do really feel that there might be a possibility with Doom 2016 might have taken a few notes from Dead Space, since the delivery of the story felt quite similar in its design. You want to know the lore, the background, and the extended context? Well, the world is littered with audio and text-based info if you're looking for it. But if you're just interested in what is happening right now, you would still feel like you're getting the full experience. You never really get bogged down by unnecessary details in both of these titles, and yet feel satisfied for playing through one meaty single-player campaign. Depending on when you're watching this, it's just a matter of time before the remake train slams through Dead Space as well, or maybe it already has. And whether or not the game remake is just a litmus test for reigniting the IP, I hope it can be included in the Remake Hall of Fame, which games like Resident Evil 2 Remake occupy. But for starters, the original game is not that old to begin with. And then there's the fact that not only did the game take a lot of great things from other titles and movies and implemented all those things right, but also became an almost genre-defining future-proof horror title that, as I've already mentioned, is a possible influence on some of the more recent titles even.